Hey friends, I want to take a moment today to talk to you about some practical and ethical concerns about your research as you go to move forward into the actual execution of your projects. There's a larger lecture, I believe module 3 or week 3, about ethics, so I'm not going to try and double dip on those. I want to make sure I cover separate points, but I want to talk about a couple of important things, more practical than ethical, but they overlap a bit. So to begin with, let's talk about your participants. Um, there are certain constraints in the research that limit who you can get as participants. For example, I would really suggest trying to build research that can utilize undergraduate college students. This is referred to as a sample of convenience or a convenient sample. And the reason why is because it's readily available. Right? It's going to make things easier for you, and it's going to be easier to basically run a large sample in that case rather than another population. And part of it too is the coercion component. So we can coerce participants to participate, right, from an ethical point of view, but we cannot bribe or force them to participate, right? So in my classes, when there's a research study like this, I might say, hey, if you participate in this study, I'll give you 5 bonus points. And my classes are based on a 1,000-point score, so 5 bonus points really isn't much of anything. It's more of a coercion. Can they deny? Can they say, oh, you know what? I don't need the 5 points. I'm good. I don't want to do that. Absolutely, absolutely. But it's a small incentive or a coercion that's meant to help students be encouraged to participate. Right? If I said, oh, I'll give you 50 points to participate, that becomes a bribe because they would be a fool not to participate. Essentially, that's half of a letter grade for their final grade in the class. So not participating has pretty substantial negative outcomes on the grade, right? So in that case, that's more of a bribe. And we want to make sure that as we design this, we be very careful about who we sample. So for example, anytime there's required participation, if they don't have any options, that's a very fine ethical area. Can they be encouraged? Yes. Can they be required? Yes, but they need options, right? Employees cannot be forced to participate. Military personnel cannot be forced to participate. Prisoners. So inmates actually have a lot of rights with regard to what can and can't be done when they're incarcerated, which I think is a very good thing, actually, because it prevents exploitation of inmates. And then clients, too. So if there's a professional sort of therapeutic environment, you have to be very cautious about this, too. So when it comes to sampling, can I advise that you do not find what are called protected populations? Do not try and sample protected populations, which include military personnel, prisoners, individuals with disabilities, physical, mental, otherwise, right? Children. Children are a protected population as well. You really want to avoid these because the ethical implications of doing so are complex. And then also there is a greater timeline involved in trying to establish this sort of population, or rather sample, excuse me. Minimal risk. We talk about this in week 3, so look forward to this. But basically, how much are we subjecting our participants to, and is it justifiable? So if you ask them questions that are very upsetting, triggering, personal, sensitive, however you want to talk about it, you have to have a darn good reason, right? So what I typically say when I'm justifying these sort of things is the topics I bring up are not any more stressful than what they might encounter if they were to read the news or scroll through social media, right? So in this case, they are experiencing minimal risk. You don't want to design a study where you're purposely upsetting them, right? Or you might be purposely triggering them in some way. Not how it's to be done. It's both unethical and it's not going to get approval from the IRB. And then obviously being master's students, you're not in a position to provide any immediate stress mitigation in a therapeutic sense, right? So, and that's not a knock on you guys. I'm not either. I don't have any of that training. So we want to make sure we're very cautious on our participants. So as you think through your research design, make sure that you can create a design that addresses what you want to address, but at the same time is mindful of participants' responses, potential responses to this, and how it might affect their emotional state as well. Deception. I'm going to go ahead and throw this on here. I don't know why I do delays like that. Please don't utilize deception. I mentioned this in another lecture as well, vehemently. I really would advise against any deception, as in don't do it. Okay? Can deception be used in research? Yes. Can it be used in master's research? I suppose. Should it? No. Okay? Deception is where you're just going to mislead a participant, or participants rather. One of the more common ways is to provide false feedback. So you might tell them, hey, read this fake You might give them a fake statistic, for example, or have them take a an intelligence test, and then tell them they got a really low score, and then ask them how they feel about it. All right. Deception is risky, and it's often seen as amoral or unacceptable for ethical reasons. So we want to avoid that. Experimental confederate's not something that many of you will have to deal with, but this idea that someone would pose as a participant when in reality they are in fact associated with the study. So you saw this, for example, in the Milgram obedience study, and then also the Solomon Asch conformity study are common cases that you might have seen previously. But you want to do as little as you can to try and lie or mislead your participants, as in zero, if possible. The IRB, especially at HCU, really frowns on deception. So are you welcome to use it if necessary? Yes. However, you really want to avoid it. The only type of deception that I would actually say is often seen as acceptable is providing them fictional materials to read. So in my studies, for example, sometimes I have them read a news article. I'll put it in quotes, a news article, but many of the details have been changed or altered, so it's not actually something that really happened, but a variation on an event that really happened. So it's almost like watching Unsolved Mysteries or some kind of crime drama based on real events, but not actually really happening, right? So in that case, it's kind of deceptive because I want them to read the article thinking it really happened, but I tell them at the end of the study, in fact, no, it didn't really happen. This is based off of similar events that have happened elsewhere. So that would be an area where you might be able to get into a little bit. Oops, there we go. Debriefing is very important. Make sure you give a thought to this when you go to write your IRB application or when you're designing your research. Essentially, this is at the end of the study where you tell them, hey, this is why you participated. Basically, you provide them a lot of the information that you didn't provide them on the front end, right? So you might really clarify the nature of the study. You might go into more detail about why the study was being done or what your hypotheses were. You might give them the opportunity to voice any grievances or negative consequences they experienced. And then, of course, you want to acknowledge them, their time and effort. You want to indicate that you, of course, do appreciate that they were a participant in your study. But this would be, as I said on the previous slide, this might be where you say, oh, actually, the news article that you read didn't actually happen as it was reported. It happened, these are a variation of the events that did actually happen. So just provide some clarity on that, and in some ways providing closure to the study. You also, of course, need to include your details on how they might reach you via email. Don't give them your phone number, but via email should they have any concerns, questions, or wish to remove their consent from the study. Those details need to be there as part of the debrief. Finally, confidentiality. Make sure, if you're taking notes right now, confidentiality and anonymity are two separate things. They are not synonymous, right? Confidentiality is basically that you are going to maintain the privacy of participants, right? As the definition indicates right there. You're maintaining the privacy. So you're not sharing their details. You're not, selling off their information. You're using it solely for the purpose of the study, and you're keeping it safe, right? So that's very important. And actually, the IRB application has very explicit guidelines for how to keep research confidential and safe in an ethical way, right? The other side of this, anonymity, is something I really want to emphasize. It's not essential, but it's actually going to be really helpful, especially if you have a study that is a little sensitive or deals in a sensitive subject matter or might be kind of triggering. You'll find that if you can guarantee anonymity and confidentiality, you'll have more participants participating, and they're more inclined to be truthful in their responses. Right? So in anonymity, basically what I would suggest is don't ask them any personally identifying details. Don't ask them for their name, for their address, for anything that you can directly connect to them as an individual. Right? You might ask them for their H number at the end because then you can give them, of course, credit for participating or whatever like that. But otherwise, nothing that identifies them directly. I don't want to keep doing this, pointing to this is anonymity here, right? Don't ask them for anything identifying, because that makes them already a little reticent because they're like, well, what if somebody finds out that I said this? Or what if my professor is the one doing this research and now they know that I feel this way? Especially at a school that is guided by Judeo-Christian principles. If the research was on a topic of abortion or gender, somebody might say, oh, well, I don't want people at HBU to know I view things this way, right? So if they can be guaranteed anonymity and confidentiality, what you've now done is you've probably gained their trust and justifiably, you're not going to betray their trust, of course, but now they can trust you to protect their responses and are most likely, or more likely rather, to provide you with honest responses to your questions, which of course, no matter what research you're doing, we always want to see honesty from our participants.